word fat, what do you think? It's negative, right? Anybody that ever says, I feel fat today, or I look fat today, like that's already this negative perception of themselves. But yet that's what you read in the literature is, can you be both? I honestly prefer, can you be fit and a little overweight or carry a little excess body fat? I know it's the same thing, but it's not. Okay, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to get in your head a picture of someone that you would consider to be the picture of health. Maybe it's somebody you know, or just that mental image of what you have of a healthy person. And now I want you to switch the other direction, and I want you to get into your mind the picture of someone that you would consider to be unhealthy, and however you would define that. Okay, so let's talk about that. I'm going to guess with relative accuracy, I can probably guess the images that you put in your head. I'm going to guess that when I asked you to picture someone healthy, whether you picture male or female, the female was probably relatively slender or athletic build, right? Maybe a little taller, who knows. Male, maybe muscular, kind of toned. And I would assume that the person that you pictured that was unhealthy probably for many of you was someone who was overweight, right? Some of you nodding your heads. Yeah, somebody that was overweight. We tend to live in a society and a world where we equate health with weight, and that visual perception of what we weigh making a translation into whether or not they are healthy. And that's okay, I do it too, right? We see someone and we make a judgment about all kinds of things. But today what we're going to talk about is, really, is there a connection between the two? And if so, how much? We always hear people focusing on weight. I need to lose weight. I need to weigh less, or I'm not at the weight I want to be. And then we tend to equate that to, are they healthy? And some of the interesting research out there is beginning to kind of turn that mindset into maybe it's not as important a deal as we think it is. Now hear me. This is not a presentation to say it doesn't matter what you eat. You never have to exercise. Like, that's not where we're going, okay? But taking the focus off of our weight and instead shifting it to healthy lifestyle. All right, so let me give you an example. You may be familiar with The Biggest Loser, right? It was a TV show. I'm not necessarily advocating that that's the best way to approach a weight loss and exercise program. It has some issues. But they had a personal trainer on this program named Bob Harper, who most of you would know is probably pretty well built, pretty muscular, somebody that we would consider the picture of health, right? He ate a paleo diet, which many of us know is high protein, and we often equate that to people who are in a healthy lifestyle, like we kind of live in that correlation. But did you know a year ago he suffered a massive heart attack? He was exercising in his gym in New York City, fell unconscious, and woke up in the hospital 2 days later and didn't know what had happened. Right? He suffered what we call a widowmaker, which is a significant coronary event that likely should have killed him. Most people would look at him and not say massive coronary event, right? Because we perceive by visualization what health should be or what it is. But for some of you, that may not be that much of a stretch. We've probably all heard a story about someone who is healthy and has a heart attack or some other medical event because of family history or because of genetics, and we know that those things are hard to overcome, right? But have you ever looked at someone who is a little bit overweight or even moving into maybe what we would call an obese category and said, they look pretty healthy to me? Like, we don't do it the other way, right? And so again, that's kind of what we're going to talk about here, is there really a connection, how much of a connection, and how much does it influence us as health and fitness professionals, how we interact with people, and what our expectations should be of what they should attain. If you read the research, and you look at this concept online, the question is actually posed online is, can you be fit and fat? And hear me, I hate that term. I hate it. Right? Because when you hear the word fat, what do you think? It's negative, right? Anybody that ever says, I feel fat today, or I look fat today, like that's already this negative perception of themselves. But yet that's what you read in the literature is, can you be both? I honestly prefer, can you be fit and a little overweight or carry a little excess body fat? I know it's the same thing, but it's not. It's a mentality and a mindset that we want to work towards. So if you Google, can you be fit and fat, you can find research and articles all over the place. But that's really what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this connection. Now, hear me, I'm not here to advocate for what is the ideal body type. We're not going to come out of here saying everybody has to be at this height, has to be this weight. That's not our goal. For a lot of reasons. One, because there's so much more than just what you weigh, but that still just looks at the physical appearance. We are and should be also and more concerned about what's on the inside from a health perspective and for lots of other reasons too. Right? We tend to just get focused on what people appear to be and focus less on what's on the inside. Right? There's a verse in 1 Samuel that talks about the Lord talking to Samuel and saying, don't pay attention to what's on the inside. Man sees stature, the Lord sees your heart and what's on the inside. Right? And so that's where we want to shift our mindset and shift our focus. So let's talk a little bit about the research, what's out there about this connection between fit and overweight. I'm going to go with overweight and excess body fat, right? There has been a wide variety of research on the concept. And as you can imagine, some really positive in this concept and some that don't support it so much. And so we're going to talk, the first one we're going to talk about looks at metabolic issues. And they actually use the term metabolically healthy obesity, which sounds like an oxymoron, right? We've never really heard the term healthy and obesity in the same sentence. Metabolically healthy really means are they absent of several things: cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, type 2 diabetes. Those are things that we would call metabolic issues. And so the question is, how many people out there are overweight or obese, but are lacking these factors that we almost always associate with people that are obese? And there was a study in 2014 that had 10 different cohorts of people across 10 different countries. So we're talking about this massive, wide-scale research into people that were obese. And what they found was, across the cohorts, a range of between 24 to 65% of the women and 40 to 75% of the men who were obese did not have any of these other metabolic issues. Now, there are two things there. One, that's a really big range across the cohort. So you would have to start to look at which countries individually to kind of see lifestyle patterns and those types of things. But what that begins to suggest to us is that there are lots of people out there who are overweight and lack all of those other disease characteristics that we always associate with that. There was another study in the Journal of the American Medical Association done not too long ago that looked at mortality rate. Like, what's the rate, when we look at mortality rate, talk about risk of death, and how does that correlate? And the really interesting thing they found was that actually the lowest mortality rate in some of their subjects came in people who actually fell into the overweight category and not the normal weight, which opens up this whole different conversation about, does some excess body fat actually give a protective effect, right? And like some of us in the room just went, woohoo, that's so exciting, right? But the other thing it showed was that as the body fat went up and up and up, so did the disease risk. So if you got into this really aggressive obesity category, there is a significant disease risk. So it's not just any range of body fatness. It is this little narrow piece that we're talking about. There was a Danish study that looked at BMI, body mass index, which we know is the relationship to height to weight. And there are some issues with body mass index, we know that. We're going to talk about a few of those in just a minute. But it looked at what BMI has the lowest mortality rate, and they identified that number, right? And they don't even really go on to say too much about what that number was, except to say over a 30-year period, the BMI with the lowest mortality rate, the BMI number went up. So across 30 years, risk of death decreased as BMI went up, right? That's totally random and weird. Why would that happen? Well, it's beginning to suggest that could be a lot of things, but it's suggesting that weight may not play as much of a role in mortality as we think it is. But we have to tease out some other pieces. But on the other side, there was a study of 6,000 Americans, and only 1% of the obese people did not have metabolic disease. Yay for the Americans, right? Another study showed that obesity was a very powerful predictor of coronary heart disease, something that we probably already knew. So how do we take these two pieces that are very different and decide how much does weight really matter in the grand scheme of health? First, make sure you understand there's a big difference between being overweight and being obese, right? BMI does height to weight ratio, and they break it into categories: normal, overweight, and then they do 3 categories of obesity. Right? Most of the research suggests that most of what we're talking about here falls into the overweight to grade 1 obesity. Grade 2 and grade 3 obesity are almost always correlated to high mortality rates and high disease risk. So the higher the rate, so again, this is not, don't worry about what you eat, never exercise, because it doesn't matter. Because it does, but it doesn't maybe matter as much in that small range that we normally would think. And some of you go, wait a minute, BMI only measures height and weight. It has nothing to do with body composition. And we talk all the time about body composition and how important that is. And you're right. Body composition plays a big part. It's very different to have two people standing next to me that weigh exactly the same, and one has 5% body fat and one has 25. But hear me, the people in these studies are people who are obese because they have excess body fat, not because they're super muscular. Okay, when they do these studies, they take people that, and most people, we aren't looking at a super high volume of people who are super bulky that always fall into this over BMI number. Okay, so we're talking about people who truly have excess body fat. So how do we answer the question? Yes or no? Can you be fit and fat? There's that term again that I don't like, but can we do this? Can we make that statement? Really, the jury is still out. But one key theme that we found, or that can be found across the research, and I'm sure this is not going to surprise you, is that one of the key factors through all of this was how active the people were, right? And it didn't matter if they were obese or whether they were overweight. If they didn't exercise, the minute they started, their mortality risk and their disease risk went down, whether or not their weight went down with it. So exercise becomes this really key variable in all of it. The most significant study that was done on this took those two factors, fitness and, yes, they called it fatness, overweightness, and they broke people into 4 categories. So can you be fit and normal weight, or fit and overweight, or unfit with both of those categories? And they looked at all of them, then they looked at disease risk, and they tried to decide what the differences were. I'm sure you're not surprised that the highest mortality rate was in the people who were unfit and overweight, or over fatness. The best or lowest mortality rate was again on people who were fit and of a normal weight. Okay, those two make sense. If you get to the middle 2 categories, okay, so this would be people who are of a normal weight that never exercise or are unfit, and they determined fitness by cardiorespiratory aerobic capacity. That's how we're defining fitness in this context, right? So they looked at people of a normal weight who were unfit, and they looked at people who were overweight, but could, measure as a fitness level. They exercise, they have a good cardiorespiratory endurance, but for whatever reason, their body weight is a little high. Exactly the same mortality rate between the two groups. Right? So what does that tell us? Exercise plays a big role in defining how healthy we are, and it's not as much about our body weight as maybe we think it is. Right? Now, and I love this because when we as health professionals have conversations with people who are overweight, they kind of know, they kind of understand that maybe it might be a limiting factor. But inevitably, you have a conversation with somebody who's of a normal weight that never exercises that goes, I don't really weigh that much, so what's the big deal? And this starts to put some context to the fact that exercise really is important regardless of what you weigh. To me, exercise, it also plays another role because exercise is vitally important for a lot of things. Right now we're talking about it in its relationship to weight, right? But it's important for so much other things, right? Stress, like why else do you exercise? Stress relief, you exercise just to feel better, to hang out with your friends. There's all kinds of reasons. I take it as, from a biblical perspective, because our bodies are a gift from God, right? Our physical bodies are something He's given to us that we need to take care of. And exercise allows us to do that. We know, many of you know the verse in 1 Corinthians where it talks about our body being our temple and God living inside of us, and we need to take care of that temple. But I see it as keeping ourselves also healthy so that we can do the things that God has entrusted us to do. If we're not exercising and not keeping ourselves fit to the level that we can fulfill what He has called us to do. So, what do we do? Where do we go? Clearly, exercise has some protective effect and it can counteract some of those negative disease risk things that we see surrounding excess weight. But we still live in a society that says weight is a big deal, right? I was looking the other day on, I don't even know what it was, I think it was Instagram. And Kelly Clarkson had a picture. You might know Kelly Clarkson. She's a singer. and is often scrutinized for her weight on social media. She had a picture of herself on the red carpet from the Golden Globes, I think. You know, beautiful dress, you know, she looked really pretty, but for society's version of entertainment, she is heavier, and hear me, if you look at her stats, she's not that heavy. She's heavier than what most people perceive a singer should be, which is a terrible perception. And you could read the comments on her Instagram ranged from, "You look fantastic," to things that were really, really less than flattering for people to say to her, right? Where did we get into a world where that's okay? That's a whole nother social media conversation. But we live in this world where, or live in a world where weight really is kind of this thing that everybody perceives as a big deal, right? Despite me standing here saying it's not as big a deal in your health as we think it is, people still live in this, I need to lose 5 pounds. I need to lose 10 pounds, right? And I have lived and traveled this journey, so I get it. I do. But how do we kind of help? And what are the problems with kind of this attitude, this emphasis on weight? Where does that get to us, especially as health professionals? How do we help some people kind of counteract that thought process? Again, not because we want them to be healthy. We don't care if they lose 5 pounds sometimes, but they live in that mindset. So this leads to maybe 2 problems. One, they might exercise excessively to try to help counterbalance that, and that's something we want to try to avoid, right? Exercise is a good thing, but too much of anything can be bad. Or we also have that group of people who exercise a ton because they hope that means they can eat whatever they want, right? And we've talked about that, but we know that really the key point to if people are really trying to lose weight is nutrition. You know, the 80-20, maybe even 90-10 rule, my favorite saying about you can't outrun your fork. Like you can way overeat what you can burn on a treadmill. So we have to make people aware of that. But the other thing that happens is people get on this bandwagon of I gotta lose weight, I gotta lose it fast, what's the best way for me to do that? And then we enter into this whole range of fad diets, right? Completely unhealthy, completely inappropriate, but because we have this world that says you need to lose weight, we have all of these options for people to do it in a completely unhealthy way. So we're going to talk about just a few that I did a random Google search in fad diets. It's really crazy what you can find. And I found 4 or 5 that I thought were interesting, might be the best word, not good. Hear me, they're not good. So the first one's called the raw food diet, right? It's exactly like it sounds. Don't cook anything. Name everything that you cook on a daily basis and now you can't eat it. Well, you could, I guess, if you wanted to. I wouldn't recommend it though, right? The range of raw food is from 104 to 118 degrees. Last time you cooked a steak or chicken, it had to be about 160. I wouldn't recommend chicken at 118, right? So, but the focus on what could be fruits and vegetables would be great, right? But it also includes anything that's ever been pasteurized. So no cheese, no dairy, nothing that's ever reached something over 118 degrees. Interesting. There's the cookie diet. It's not as fantastic as it sounds, right? You don't just get to bake a bunch of chocolate chip cookies and keep them in a thing and then just eat them. Like, that would be fantastic, I agree. But there's this, it's called the Hollywood cookie diet. You have to buy, of course, these cookies that they have made that they deem are, quote, healthy. They probably have lots of protein in them and whatever, and you get to eat 1 or 2 cookies for breakfast, 1 or 2 cookies for lunch, and then you get to have a sensible dinner. Well, do the calorie count. Anybody's going to lose weight on that. And from what I've read, cookies are not so good, right? They're a little pasty. They're not very good. One of my favorite and most interesting ones I read about was called the 5-bite diet. And it is exactly like it sounds. You take 5 bites of whatever you have, and then you're done. And I was looking at that thinking, his goal is to promote portion size, right? We all know people eat way more than they're supposed to, right? Cereal bowl. What's a cereal? Half a cup. What do most people eat? 4, right? So we tend to overeat on a serving size. But I was reading a blog of someone who was doing this diet, and their diet consisted of a bite of a Luna bar, a bite of some type of fiber bar, and 3 bites of what appeared to be some type of a convenience store burrito that they had taken out of a plastic bag and microwaved. And I'm looking at that going, okay, there's no nutrition there. Every piece of that diet is completely processed food. And don't get me started on the waste that occurs, right? Like throwing away number one, Luna bars are expensive. Like, why in the world would you eat one and throw it away? Eat a bite of one. So some problems with that. The last one is the baby food diet. I have children, they're older now, but even the smell of opening a baby food jar would make me turn away from this one pretty quickly. But the standard is that you can eat up to 14 jars of baby food a day and then have a sensible dinner. I don't know that I'd feel like a sensible dinner if I'd eaten 14 jars of baby food in a day. But it's all about their what they're telling you is that it's it's portion control, right? Because it's in this jar. Most of it are, think about every baby food you've ever seen: squash, peas, carrots, apricots. You know, right? It's fruit and vegetables, so it's nutritious. But yeah, there's just all kinds of problems with that. I don't want to go there. There are other diets, and here's the problem with the word diet. Like when we hear the word diet, we typically think people are doing something or eating in a pattern to lose weight, right? When really, when we talk about diet, we should be talking about what kind of lifestyle can you maintain? Because fad diets are things that you can't maintain. You just can't. They can't be done long term for the most part. And so, however, when you hear people say, my diet, they almost always go to the point where they're saying, oh, you're trying to lose weight, you know, some kind of a quick fix kind of thing. And moving that mindset to talking about just your nutritional plan or your nutritional lifestyle instead of using the word diet. But there are other nutritional lifestyles in the research that are a little less faddish, but still sometimes hard to maintain. Paleo diet, we talked about just a little bit. Bob Harper was a proponent of the paleo diet, which was high amounts of protein, fish, nuts, seeds, eggs, but no dairy and no carbohydrates, basically no grains, no whole grains. It actually had a negative impact on him because his genetic disposition gave him the ability to carry the bad lipoprotein that exists. And when you consume large amounts of fat and fatty foods, that kind of exacerbates that effect. And so that actually led to part of his heart attack issues. Low carb diets kind of are the trend right now, ketogenic, not consuming a lot of carbohydrates. The problem there is they often tend to cut out things that are good carbohydrates like fruits. And really what we should do is say maybe don't eat so much sugar and processed food, and then your carbohydrate rate would go down and that would be okay, but you could still eat fruits. But instead they kind of wipe out all carbohydrates and that becomes problematic. I think we have to be really careful about any diet that suggests elimination of a whole food group, right? We have to be careful of that because it's not sustainable, number one, unless it's for a dietary, a genetic or a disease-related issue. We really have to be careful about saying don't ever eat dairy or don't ever eat carbs because it's just not a sustainable lifestyle. And that's really what we want to get to, is a lifestyle that somebody can maintain long-term to lead them to health, right? Because honestly, if you have somebody who doesn't eat well and they don't exercise, if they would change those two pieces and just start eating a little better, add some fruits and vegetables, and move a little more, guess what would likely happen to their weight? It would go down. Now, it may not go down 20 pounds in a week, which we know is not healthy anyway, but it would start to go down. But we get into that quick fix, gotta fix it, gotta go now. The best option, whole foods, plant-based, things that grow out of the ground, things that you can grow in your garden, right? With lean protein, chicken, fish, red meat in small amounts. That's Bob Harper now has kind of gone to this diet where it's whole, again, not diet, lifestyle, whole food, plant-based, good proteins, low-fat dairy. He eats all food groups. He doesn't eliminate one, right? But it's a good across the range. Balance, I think, is really important. That's really what we need to focus on with people. How do we balance food and consume good amounts of food and adequate amounts of exercise and focus less and less and less on the weight piece of it, right? And I think balance is even a biblical perspective. There's a verse in Mark that talks about when you put things in your body, it can't defile you because it doesn't go into your heart, right? Anything you eat, you consume, you digest, and you get rid of, right? And in the verse, Jesus talks about how, you know, just because you take something into your body doesn't mean that it contaminates you because you don't let it impact your heart. Right? And there's also a verse in Timothy that talks about everything being created by God. And so when everything's created by God, we shouldn't reject certain things. And I maybe take that a little far and say that means balance and not eliminating a food group. But you know, we have carbohydrates for a reason. They are a source of energy. There's a need to take those in. Right? So the question now, moving forward, is how do we as health professionals, how do we take this information and translate it to a society that really still has this crazy focus on weight? And likely you'll have clients that will come in and say, I got to lose 10 pounds. How are you going to help me do that? And you're like, well, it's not really about weight, but I want to lose 10 pounds. What am I going to do? And how do we help them learn that balance and not always just look at a number on the scale? I think there are two things as health professionals that we really can do as we work with clients. The first one is be really careful and don't judge by what you see. It's an easy trap to get into with weight or anything else, right? You see somebody and you make a snap decision about something. Really focus on their goals, focus on their attitude and that they're there and want to make a change, and not on the fact that maybe they are overweight or obese and how that's going to impact them. But we actually know in the research this is not really the case for most health professionals. There's a ton of research out there on exercise science students, on physicians, on nurses, that all say they have this perception of what the ideal body type would be, and that they carry negative perceptions of clients because they don't carry that ideal body type. If you already have a negative perception of your client, you are not going to be very successful when you work with them. So you have to get over the mindset of people needing to be a particular body type or a particular way for you to be able to work with them and challenge them. Okay? Actually, there's a verse in Romans that I love that talks about this. It's from the Message translation. It talks about we're all fashioned into this perfectly or excellently formed and marvelously functioning parts, right? We're all uniquely and wonderfully made. But it also tells us to not judge and not compare and not be envious and not be prideful, right? The prideful part I think is important because I think it's easy to look at somebody and go, I'm not that way. You know, and we all have our own issues, and so we have to be careful about how we perceive people. The second one that I think is really important is that we need to set a good example. Now, hear me. This does not mean that every one of you in this room needs to be a particular body type and weight. That is not what I mean. I mean you need to eat well, but it also means we're not perfect, right? I'm not going to stand up here and say health professionals should never eat a piece of cake because that would not be me, right? This is not how that works. But we need to practice what we preach to some extent as what it says, right? If we're going to promote healthy lifestyle and we're going to promote consumption of fruits and vegetables, we probably should eat a few of our own. If we're going to promote activity and exercise, guess what we should probably do on a daily basis? If other people can't get past the fact that you maybe weigh a little more and are still a health professional, they're going to have to get over that. But part of that is your job to help them understand, hey, it's not really about the weight. It is to some extent. We don't want to push into the morbid obesity, but it's about a healthy lifestyle. It's about eating well, it's about exercising well, and allowing those things to come into place. And in the end, it's really about being happy with who you are.